A cowboy hired an Apache woman with a veil. When the veil fell, his world changed forever. Eli Thompson had lived on the edge of the Arizona desert all his life. The ranch he inherited from his father was small compared to the sprawling estates in the east, but it was his home, and he loved it fiercely. Every morning he woke before the sun, the cold air of the desert brushing against his face as he stepped outside his wooden cabin. The smell of dry earth and sagebrush filled his lungs, and the sight of his cattle grazing quietly on the dusty plains gave him a sense of peace. Life on the ranch was hard, but it was honest, and Eli had never known anything else. This season had been especially difficult. The rains had come late, and the grass that fed the cattle was thin and dry. Predators had been more brazen than usual, and rustlers prowled the nearby canyons, taking advantage of the isolated ranches. Eli had managed to hold things together, but he knew that without extra help, the next few months would be impossible. He needed strong hands, sharp eyes, and someone who could endure the harshness of the desert without complaint. One late afternoon, as Eli walked along the fence line checking for gaps, he noticed a figure approaching from the dusty trail that led into town. The figure moved with quiet confidence, a long veil flowing in the wind, hiding the person's face. Eli squinted, unsure at first. It was unusual to see travelers here. Most people avoided the desert unless they had business in the town miles away. The figure drew closer, and Eli saw the way the person rode a horse with grace. This was no ordinary traveler. Whoever this was, they were skilled. Eli watched as the horse trotted easily, guided by a rider who seemed at home in the saddle. When they reached the ranch, Eli stepped forward, his hand shading his eyes. "Good evening," he called out. "You lost, or are you looking for work?" "I need work, and I can handle ranch life." He studied the figure for a long moment, noting the posture, the confident grip on the reins, and the eyes that peered from behind the veil. They were sharp, alert, and unafraid. "All right," Eli said finally. "I'm Eli Thompson. This is my ranch. You'll start tomorrow morning. Can you handle cattle?" "And horses?" She rode with him as he checked the fences, helped him repair broken boards, and even managed to coax a stubborn calf into the corral without a word. The other ranch hands watched from a distance, whispering among themselves. They had never seen a woman work like this, and her veil made her even more mysterious. Eli ignored their murmurs, focusing instead on the work at hand. Over the next few days, it became clear that she was not just competent but exceptional. She anticipated trouble before it happened, noticed weaknesses in the fence that others missed, and moved with a quiet grace that suggested she had spent her life outdoors. Eli found himself increasingly impressed, but he also found himself thinking about her more than he expected. There was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence that was both intriguing and comforting. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the desert turned a deep orange, Eli and the woman sat on a fallen log, watching the cattle graze. The day had been long, and the air was filled with the smell of dust and dry grass. Eli found himself talking about the ranch, about the struggles he had faced, and about his father who had taught him everything he knew. She listened quietly, her head slightly tilted, and every so often she would nod or make a small comment that showed she was paying attention. Eli realized that he was used to talking to men who either ignored advice or offered empty words. She, on the other hand, seemed genuinely interested, and her eyes, even behind the veil, seemed to understand more than she let on. The other hands, initially suspicious, began to accept her presence. They noticed how she handled the horses with ease, how she calmed the cattle during storms, and how she carried herself in a way that demanded respect without demanding it. Some were still wary, whispering about her origins, but Eli made it clear that she was part of the team. As days turned into weeks, the bond between Eli and the woman grew stronger. They did not speak much about her past, and Eli did not press her. There was a mutual understanding that some things were private, and both respected that. Work was hard and the desert was unforgiving, but together they made it manageable. One afternoon, a group of rustlers tried to drive a herd away from the ranch. Eli and his men, including the veiled woman, rode out to meet them. She moved with remarkable skill, anticipating the rustlers' moves, and helped guide the cattle to safety. Eli saw for the first time how fearless she was, willing to put herself in danger to protect the herd. That day, he realized that her value went beyond skill. She had courage, and courage was rare in anyone. As the weeks passed, Eli began to notice other things about her: the way she handled small tasks with care, the way she seemed to understand the land in ways he could not, and the quiet wisdom in her actions. He realized that she had a past full of experiences that shaped her, and though she did not share them, he respected her privacy. The ranch began to thrive again. Fences were repaired, cattle were safer, and the team worked efficiently. The woman with the veil became an essential part of the operation, not because Eli said so, but because she proved herself every single day. One evening, after a long day of work, Eli watched her from the porch of his cabin. She sat by the fire, carefully cleaning her tools, her veil catching the last rays of sunlight. There was a mystery about her, a sense that she carried the weight of many untold stories, and Eli felt a strange sense of anticipation. He wondered who she was, where she had come from, and what experiences had shaped her into the person she was. But for now, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she was there, working alongside him, sharing the hardships and the small victories of ranch life. And in the quiet of the desert evening, Eli realized that his world, as he knew it, was beginning to change, though he could not yet see how completely. In the coming days, the bond between Eli and the veiled woman would grow stronger, tested by challenges that neither of them could foresee. The desert had a way of revealing truths, and soon, Eli would discover that some of the most profound lessons in life came not from the land, or the cattle, or even hard work, but from the people who rode into our lives when we least expected them. And so the veiled woman remained on the ranch, quiet, strong, and mysterious. Eli watched her, wondered about her, and respected her. The world outside may have been quick to judge, to whisper, and to doubt, but here in the wide-open spaces of the desert, she had a place. And in that place, for the first time in a long while, Eli felt a spark of hope, not just for the ranch, but for everything life might still have in store. Days passed on the ranch, and Eli Thompson continued to observe the veiled woman closely. He still did not know her name, and she had not offered it, but that did not matter. What mattered was her presence, her skill, and the calm confidence she carried in every action. She moved through the ranch with a quiet efficiency, repairing fences, checking the health of the cattle, and guiding the horses with ease. The other hands had gradually begun to respect her. While some were still skeptical, they could not argue with her results. One morning, Eli found her near the corral, her hands working quickly to mend a broken gate. The sun was rising, casting a warm, golden light over the desert. Dust hung in the air, and the distant mountains were tinged with orange. Eli approached her slowly, careful not to startle her. "You're fast," he said, his voice carrying over the quiet morning. She looked up, her eyes meeting his briefly from behind the veil. "It needs to be done," she replied simply. "No time to waste." She had a way of predicting when a storm was coming, often noticing subtle changes in the wind or the way the birds behaved. She could calm a skittish horse with a gentle touch and quiet words. She moved silently through the night, checking on the cattle and repairing fences without disturbing anyone. Eli realized that her abilities went beyond hard work. She had a deep understanding of the land and animals that came from years of experience he had not even imagined. Despite her quiet nature, she was also clever. One afternoon, Eli had gone into town to pick up supplies and left her in charge. When he returned, he found the cattle perfectly arranged, the fences secure, and even the young calves safely corralled. He asked the other hands how she had managed it, and they shrugged, unable to explain. Eli smiled to himself. She had a way of doing things that made everything seem simple, even when it was not. At night, when the work was done, Eli and the veiled woman often sat by the fire. She never spoke much, but her presence was comforting. Sometimes she would hum softly, a tune that seemed to rise naturally from the desert itself. Eli began to find himself talking to her, sharing small stories about his life, his father, and the ranch. He did not expect her to respond much, but she listened attentively, occasionally offering a thoughtful comment or nod. One evening, as the stars began to appear, Eli noticed that she was staring at the sky. He joined her, looking up at the vast expanse of darkness dotted with bright lights. "The desert is quiet at night," he said, "but it has its own voice if you listen." She spoke rarely, but when she did, her words carried weight. He realized that her silence was not emptiness, it was thoughtfulness. She observed, understood, and acted, and that made her more powerful than anyone who spoke without thinking. Despite their growing trust, there were moments of tension. Some of the ranch hands still whispered about her origins. They questioned why a veiled woman was working in such harsh conditions, and some even suggested that she might be hiding something. Eli, however, would not allow anyone to speak disrespectfully about her. He knew her value, not only to the ranch but to himself. One afternoon, a challenge arose that tested their growing bond. A herd of wild cattle had wandered close to the edge of the property, and some were threatening to break through the fence. Eli and the men rode out to control them, but the situation quickly became chaotic. The cattle were panicked, kicking up dust and running in different directions. Eli struggled to regain control, and the other men were shouting instructions that only seemed to confuse the herd further. In the middle of the chaos, the veiled woman appeared, moving calmly and decisively. She directed the cattle with gestures and soft, firm commands, guiding them back into the corral with skill that amazed Eli. Her knowledge of animal behavior was instinctive, and she seemed to understand exactly what each cow needed to calm down. When the dust settled, Eli rode up to her, his heart still racing. "You saved the herd," he said. She gave a small shrug. "I did what needed to be done." That moment marked a turning point. He no longer saw her merely as a helper on the ranch. He began to see her as a partner, someone whose abilities complemented his own and whose presence made the ranch stronger. The next few weeks were busy, but the bond between Eli and the veiled woman grew stronger. They spent long hours together, riding across the desert, checking on distant fences and working the cattle. Eli began to share more of himself, talking about his father's lessons, the struggles he had faced when he first took over the ranch, and his hopes for the future. She listened quietly, sometimes offering advice or guidance that was surprisingly wise for someone he knew so little about. One evening, after a particularly long day, Eli noticed her sitting alone by the edge of the creek, her reflection shimmering in the water. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. "Do you ever miss home?" he asked gently. She paused before answering, her voice soft. "I don't know," she said. "Home is not always a place. Sometimes it's a feeling. Sometimes it's people who understand you." Life on the ranch continued in this rhythm, hard work during the day, quiet reflection at night. Eli began to notice small changes in himself. He was less impatient, more observant, and more willing to listen. The veiled woman's presence had an effect on him that he could not fully explain. She challenged his assumptions without even speaking, simply by being herself. Rumors from the nearby town began to reach the ranch. People had noticed a veiled woman working with a cowboy and were curious, some even suspicious. Eli paid little attention. He knew the value of a person by their actions, not by gossip or appearances. And in every action, the veiled woman proved herself beyond doubt. One day, as Eli returned from town, he found her in the middle of the pasture, guiding a young colt through a series of gentle exercises. The horse responded to her touch with patience and trust, moving gracefully despite being wild and energetic. Eli watched, fascinated by her ability to communicate with the animal in a way that seemed almost magical. "You have a way with them," he said. She looked up at him, her eyes calm and steady. "They listen if you respect them," she replied. "Respect is important. They can feel fear and doubt. They respond to confidence." Her quiet confidence, her understanding of the land and animals, and her careful observation of those around her had made her an invaluable part of the ranch. As the sun set that evening, Eli found himself thinking about how much the ranch had changed in a few short weeks. The fences were stronger, the cattle were safer, and the team worked more efficiently. But more than that, he felt a change within himself. He had begun to see the world differently, through her eyes in a way, appreciating the strength, courage, and wisdom that could come from unexpected places. The veiled woman remained a mystery, but Eli realized that it was a mystery he was glad to have in his life. He did not need to know everything about her past to respect her, admire her, and trust her. And as the desert night settled over the ranch, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds, Eli understood that some connections were more important than answers, more meaningful than explanations. And so, life continued. The ranch thrived, the team worked hard, and Eli and the veiled woman continued to learn from one another. Every day brought new challenges, but also new moments of understanding and trust. The bond they were forming was quiet, strong, and unspoken, built not on words alone, but on shared work, respect, and the recognition of each other's strength. Eli did not yet know the full story of the veiled woman, but he sensed that her arrival on the ranch was not just a coincidence. There was something about her presence that had begun to change his world in ways he could not yet comprehend. And though he did not understand it fully, he welcomed it, ready to face whatever challenges and revelations lay ahead, together with her by his side. The morning was unusually quiet. The sun had just begun to rise, casting soft golden light over the desert and the ranch. Eli Thompson was finishing his breakfast when he noticed something strange. The veiled woman, who had always moved with quiet confidence, seemed tense. She walked slowly toward the corral, her hands tightening around the reins of a restless horse. Eli decided to follow her. He had learned to notice small changes in her behavior, something that others might overlook, but that often meant more than any words she could speak. When she reached the corral, a young calf had wandered near a broken fence, its small hooves sinking into the dry earth as it struggled to free itself. Without hesitation, she moved to the animal, calming it with gentle touches and quiet words. Eli watched as she worked with precision and care, but there was something different about her demeanor today, a mix of focus, urgency, and strangely fear. Before Eli could speak, a shout came from the distance. A rider was galloping toward the ranch, dust rising behind him like smoke. Eli's heart sank. Rustlers. He swung his hat in the air, signaling the others, while the veiled woman guided the calf safely back into the corral. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and efficient, even as tension filled the air. The rider arrived quickly. "Mr. Thompson, trouble in the south pasture. A stampede's heading this way," he yelled, barely stopping his horse. Eli's eyes met the veiled woman's. "We have to move fast," he said. Without a word, she mounted a horse and rode alongside him, ready to help. Together, they galloped toward the south pasture, dust swirling around them. The distant sound of the stampede grew louder, the panicked cries of the cattle filling the air. Eli realized immediately that the situation was far worse than he had imagined. A stampede could destroy fences, injure animals, or even put lives at risk. The closer they got, the more chaotic it became. The cattle ran in all directions, some colliding with each other, others barreling toward the wooden fences. Eli and the other hands tried to corral them, but the sheer force of the herd made it nearly impossible. It was then that the veiled woman took action in a way that left Eli in awe. She rode through the chaos with complete control, guiding the cattle with sharp movements of her reins and soft, commanding words. Eli realized that her skill went beyond experience. She understood the animals' fear, their instincts, and their needs. Slowly, carefully, she began to bring order to the stampede, directing the frightened cattle toward a safe path. Her calm presence seemed to have an effect not just on the animals but on the other ranch hands as well. They followed her lead, moving as a team under her guidance. In the middle of the rush, Eli noticed something had happened. Her veil had caught on the reins, and in the sudden movements it slipped from her face. For the first time he saw her fully. She was beautiful, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of someone much older than her years. Eli stopped for a brief moment, forgetting the stampede, completely captivated. She was an Apache woman, her dark hair framing her face, her eyes alive with courage and determination. The realization hit Eli harder than he expected. He had assumed so much about her before even seeing her face. In his mind, she had been another traveler, perhaps a European or Mexican immigrant, someone from outside the desert he knew so well. But seeing her now, he felt a wave of respect and admiration unlike anything he had experienced before. Despite the shock, she continued to work with the cattle, guiding them safely back into the corral. Eli rode beside her, shouting instructions, but it was clear she was in command. By the time the last of the cattle were secure, the sun had risen fully, casting long shadows across the ranch. The dust had settled and the danger was over. Eli dismounted, his heart still racing. He approached her cautiously. You're remarkable," he said, struggling to find the right words. She looked at him calmly, her face serious but composed. "I did what needed to be done," she replied. There was no pride in her tone, only quiet assurance. Eli felt a mixture of emotions, relief, admiration, and something deeper he could not yet name. He realized that his assumptions about her had been completely wrong. She was not only capable but extraordinary, and he had underestimated her because of appearances alone. The other ranch hands who had witnessed the event were silent, staring at her with a mixture of awe and respect. Some had doubted her from the beginning, but now there was no question. She had saved the herd and prevented what could have been a disaster. Later that afternoon, Eli and the woman sat by the fence, catching their breath after the morning's chaos. The veiled woman had replaced her veil now, but the sight of her uncovered face still lingered in Eli's mind. He could not stop thinking about the strength, intelligence, and courage he had just witnessed. "You handled that better than anyone could have," he said finally. She nodded slightly. "It is not about being better. It is about knowing what needs to be done and acting without fear." She did not boast, did not complain, and did not need recognition. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Over the next few days, the ranch began to feel different. Eli noticed subtle changes in the way he viewed everything, the land, the cattle, and even the people around him. He had always respected hard work, but now he understood that courage, wisdom, and understanding were just as important, and the veiled woman embodied all of these qualities. He also began to reflect on his own biases. Seeing her face, realizing her heritage, and witnessing her strength forced him to confront assumptions he had never questioned. For a moment, he felt ashamed that he had silently wondered about her origins, judging her before truly knowing her. But that moment passed, replaced by gratitude for the lessons she had already taught him, silently and without judgment. Life on the ranch continued, but Eli could not help but notice how others had started to treat her differently. The whispering and suspicion that had followed her arrival began to fade. People respected her abilities, and her actions had spoken louder than any rumor. Eli realized that true respect was earned through deeds, and she had earned it in full measure. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the desert turned a deep orange, Eli found himself sitting near the creek, watching her clean the tools after a long day of work. The calm water reflected her image, and Eli could not stop staring at her face. He felt a connection growing, deeper than he could explain, born from shared work, trust, and the understanding of each other's strengths. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he said quietly, breaking the silence. She looked up, her eyes steady and calm. "Different does not mean better or worse. It just means you have to see things in a new way." He realized that her presence had already changed the way he saw the world. He was more patient, more observant, and more willing to trust in abilities beyond his own. And he knew that this was only the beginning. The incident with the stampede became a story that would be told many times at the ranch. But for Eli, it was not just about the cattle or the chaos, it was about revelation. He had seen courage, wisdom, and strength in a way he had never imagined, and it had changed him. He understood that appearances could be misleading, and that the true measure of a person lay in their actions and character. And yet, even with all he had seen, he knew there were still mysteries about her past that he would never fully know. Her quiet demeanor, the way she guarded her personal history, and the depth in her eyes all hinted at experiences and stories hidden beneath the surface. But Eli did not mind. He respected her privacy and valued the bond they were building together. As the desert night settled over the ranch, with stars scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns, Eli realized that his life was no longer the same. The veiled woman had arrived quietly, worked diligently, and shown him a new way of seeing the world. He felt a mix of gratitude, admiration, and curiosity. He did not know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. She had changed his world forever. And he was ready to face whatever came next, side by side with her, learning from her strength, courage, and wisdom. Life on the ranch began to settle into a steady rhythm, but the quiet of the desert did not mean life was easy. The veiled woman, whose name Eli had still not learned, continued to prove her worth in ways that went far beyond her skills with horses and cattle. Her calm, careful approach to every task made her an essential part of the ranch's daily operations. Eli could see the respect she had earned from the other ranch hands, even if some of the townspeople remained hesitant to accept her. One afternoon, Eli received news that a neighboring ranch was holding a small meeting to discuss the upcoming cattle drives and how to protect their herds from rustlers. The townspeople would be present as well. He decided that it was time for the veiled woman to be introduced more formally. She had proven herself repeatedly, but some of the local ranchers and townsfolk still whispered doubts, curious about the mysterious woman who had arrived alone in the desert. Eli approached her that evening as she worked on repairing a corral fence. The sun was low in the sky, painting the desert in warm shades of orange and red. "I want you to come with me to the meeting tomorrow," he said. She looked up, her eyes thoughtful behind the veil. "Why?" she asked softly. "Because it's time they see what you can do," Eli replied. "You've earned their respect, but some still need to see it for themselves. I'll stand with you. You won't be alone." The townspeople and neighboring ranchers noticed immediately that Eli was not alone. The veiled woman sat tall in the saddle, her posture confident and steady, her hands skillfully guiding the horse. Whispers followed her as she passed, but Eli rode proudly, showing that he supported her fully. When they arrived at the meeting, some of the men looked skeptical. They had heard rumors, of course, about the veiled woman, and her mysterious arrival had made them curious and cautious. But Eli did not hesitate to introduce her. "This is Maya," he said simply. "She has been working on my ranch for several weeks, and she has proven herself in every way. I trust her, and you should too." Maya gave a small nod in acknowledgement but did not speak immediately. Eli noticed how her calm presence seemed to settle the room, drawing attention not because of her appearance, but because of the quiet confidence she exuded. Over the course of the meeting, she demonstrated her knowledge of cattle behavior, strategies to prevent rustlers from stealing the herds, and techniques to handle the desert terrain during long drives. Her advice was practical, precise, and effective. One by one, the skeptical ranchers began to see her value. Even those who had doubted her abilities were forced to acknowledge her skill and intelligence. Eli watched with a mixture of pride and relief. He had known her value all along, but seeing others recognize it as well was satisfying. It was not just about the work she did. It was about breaking down barriers, challenging assumptions, and showing that courage and skill did not belong to any single group of people. After the meeting, a few of the ranchers approached her directly. "I underestimated you," one admitted, shaking his head. "I didn't think a woman could handle cattle like that. I was wrong." "It's not about being a woman or a man," she said softly. "It's about understanding what needs to be done and doing it well." In the following days, Eli noticed other subtle changes in the town. People who had once whispered or stared began to approach with kindness, asking advice or offering help. Children were no longer afraid to watch her work with the horses, and even the more skeptical ranch hands began to emulate her careful, thoughtful approach to the cattle. Back on the ranch, Eli found himself reflecting on the changes. He had always believed that hard work and determination were enough to succeed, but Maya had shown him that respect, understanding, and courage were just as important. She had challenged his assumptions in ways he could not have imagined, and he realized that he was learning from her every day. One evening, as the sun set over the desert, Eli and Maya sat near the corral, watching the cattle graze. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush, and the sky was painted with colors that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. "You've changed things here," Eli said quietly. Maya looked at him, her eyes calm and steady. "I didn't change anything," she replied. "You were ready to see differently. I just helped you notice it." Over the next few weeks, Eli and Maya worked even more closely together. They repaired fences, tended to the cattle, and planned for the coming seasons. Eli noticed that he was thinking more carefully, listening more, and observing more than ever before. Maya had a way of showing him the importance of patience, attention, and respect, and he found that he was becoming a better man because of her. The bond between them deepened, though it was quiet and unspoken. They shared the challenges of the desert, the joy of small victories, and the satisfaction of hard work well done. Eli began to realize that this connection was more than friendship. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. One morning, a group of neighboring ranchers visited the property, bringing news of an upcoming cattle drive that would stretch across difficult terrain. Eli was confident in their abilities, knowing that Maya's presence would make a significant difference. During the meeting, she again demonstrated her insight and skill, advising on routes, water sources, and strategies to keep the cattle safe. The ranchers listened intently, taking notes and asking questions, clearly impressed. Afterward, one of the older men who had been most skeptical approached Eli quietly. "I didn't believe in her at first," he admitted, "but now I see that she's more capable than anyone I've worked with. I'm sorry for doubting her." Maya did not seek praise, but her actions had spoken for her. The respect she earned was real and lasting, not given lightly, but deserved through courage, intelligence, and determination. That evening, as they returned to the ranch, Eli rode beside Maya, watching the way the desert stretched out before them. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, and the last rays of sunlight glimmered on the distant mountains. "You've taught me a lot," Eli said softly. Maya glanced at him briefly, a small smile appearing beneath her veil. "You taught yourself," she replied. "I only helped you see it." He realized that life on the ranch had changed, not because of the land or the cattle or even the work, but because of the people who rode into his life and showed him a new way of seeing the world. Maya had done that for him. She had broken barriers, challenged assumptions, and forced him to reconsider what he believed about courage, skill, and respect. And as the desert night settled over the ranch, with stars shimmering like tiny lanterns above, Eli knew that this was only the beginning. The bond between him and Maya had grown stronger, built not just on work and trust, but on the shared understanding of what it meant to face challenges, to stand tall, and to earn respect through action. The ranch had changed, the town had changed, and Eli himself had changed. He could see the world differently now, more clearly and with more appreciation for the strength and courage that people like Maya carried quietly within them. And he knew deep in his heart that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, side by side, with trust, respect, and an unspoken understanding that some bonds could never be broken. The desert had settled into its quiet rhythm, the heat of the day fading into cool, gentle evenings. Eli Thompson rode out across the ranch, checking fences and watching the cattle graze. Life had changed in ways he could not have imagined when the veiled woman first appeared on his land. Her presence had not only strengthened the ranch but had transformed him, opening his eyes to courage, respect, and understanding in a way he had never known. Maya, the veiled woman, worked beside him as always. They moved in rhythm, each understanding the other without the need for many words. Their bond had grown stronger with every challenge they faced, from stampedes to repairs to tending to injured cattle. Eli had come to rely on her insight and wisdom, and he respected her more than anyone he had ever known. One morning, Eli noticed smoke rising from the distant mountains. A small fire had begun, likely from a lightning strike. Fires in the desert could spread quickly and become dangerous. He rode swiftly toward the area with Maya following close behind. By the time they arrived, the fire had grown, threatening to reach the grazing cattle. Eli's heart pounded. They had to act fast. Maya assessed the situation calmly, her eyes scanning the landscape. "We need to create a path to guide the cattle away," she said firmly. "I'll lead them through the safe route. You and the others drive them from behind." They focused on the task, knowing that hesitation could cost them dearly. Hours later, after the last of the cattle were safe and the fire was under control, Eli dismounted and approached Maya. His face was streaked with sweat and dust, but his eyes shone with admiration. "You saved them again," he said quietly. She shook her head, brushing dust from her sleeves. "We saved them," she replied. Together, she had transformed the way people saw each other and themselves. The townspeople, once wary of her, now approached with respect and admiration. Children would watch her ride with fascination, and the other ranchers sought her advice on managing cattle, planning drives, and surviving in the harsh desert environment. Eli felt a deep sense of pride, not in himself, but in her. She had earned every bit of respect she received, not by words or show, but through her actions, and he had been fortunate enough to witness it all, to learn from her strength and wisdom. One evening, Eli and Maya rode out to the edge of the desert together. The sky was painted in shades of pink and purple, the last light of the sun reflecting off the distant mountains. The air was calm, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. Eli turned to her, finally feeling ready to speak the words he had held inside for so long. "Maya," he said softly, "I don't think I ever told you how much you've changed my life. You've taught me more than I can say, about courage, respect, and seeing people as they truly are." "I did not change your life," she said quietly. "You chose to see differently. I only helped you notice it." As they returned to the ranch, Eli noticed the other hands working with renewed energy, the cattle grazing peacefully and the fences standing strong. The ranch had become more than just a place of work. It was a place of learning, trust, and growth. And at the center of it all was Maya, whose quiet strength had reshaped their world. In the following weeks, Eli decided it was time for Maya to take a more visible role in the community. He rode into town with her once again, not for work, but to show the townspeople that she was a valued member of their society. This time, there were no whispers or doubts. People greeted her with smiles, asking for advice, offering assistance, and showing the respect she had earned through her actions. Even the most skeptical ranchers approached her with humility, acknowledging her skill and courage. "I was wrong to doubt you," one man said. "You've shown all of us what true strength looks like." Her focus was always on the work, on the results, and on helping others see what could be done with courage and determination. Eli watched her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and admiration. She had changed the ranch, the town, and most importantly, him. Back at the ranch, life continued with its daily rhythm. Eli and Maya worked side by side, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and planning for the coming seasons. But now, there was a sense of peace and accomplishment that had not existed before. They were no longer just surviving in the harsh desert, they were thriving together. One quiet evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of indigo, Eli and Maya sat on a hill overlooking the ranch. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying the scent of dry earth and wildflowers. Eli felt a sense of calm he had not known in years. "You've done more than just help with the ranch," he said softly. "You've shown me how to see the world differently. How to respect people for who they are, not what I think they might be." She had become more than a partner in work. She was a companion, a teacher, and a friend whose presence had reshaped his life. The desert, once a place of harsh survival, now felt full of possibility, beauty, and connection. As the weeks turned into months, the ranch continued to flourish. Eli and Maya faced challenges together: storms, injuries, and the occasional rustler. But they handled each with the strength, wisdom, and trust they had developed over time. The bond between them had grown unbreakable, built on shared experiences, respect, and the knowledge that they could rely on each other no matter what. The townspeople now recognized Maya as a valued member of the community. Her skills, courage, and quiet wisdom had earned her the respect of everyone around her. Children would run to watch her ride, and the other ranchers sought her advice on everything from cattle to survival in the desert. Eli felt proud not because of himself, but because of her, the incredible woman who had arrived at his ranch one day, veiled and mysterious, and transformed everything she touched. One afternoon, as they worked together in the fields, Eli realized that his life had been forever changed. He had learned to see beyond appearances, to value courage and wisdom above all else, and to respect people for who they truly were. And all of this had come because of Maya, the veiled woman whose arrival had seemed so ordinary but had turned out to be extraordinary. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eli and Maya rode together across the desert. The wind swept past them, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the promise of new beginnings. The ranch, the town, and their lives had been transformed, and they knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Eli looked at Maya, feeling a sense of gratitude, admiration, and a quiet love that had grown over time. She had changed his world forever, not through words or demands, but through her actions, her courage, and her wisdom. And in the wide-open desert under the endless sky, he knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, side by side, partners in life, work, and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The desert, once a place of struggle and solitude, had become a place of growth, learning, and connection. And at the heart of it all was Maya, the woman who had entered Eli's life quietly, worked diligently, and shown him a new way of seeing the world. Together they had built more than a successful ranch. They had built a life full of respect, trust, and the promise of a future shaped by courage and understanding. And so, under the vast sky of the Arizona desert, Eli Thompson and Maya rode together, their bond unshakable, their hearts filled with gratitude, and their world forever changed.